The fluorescent lights in the courtroom hummed with an oppressive drone that seemed to match the rhythm of my racing heart. I sat in the gallery, my dress blues crisp and pressed, the weight of my service medals pulling at my chest, like anchors dragging me down into a sea of memories I'd rather forget. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Bronze Star with Valor, all reduced to props in what would become the most humiliating day of my life. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and I'm a staff sergeant in the United States Army. Or rather, I was. The IED that took my left leg below the knee also took my active duty status, leaving me with a medical retirement, a prosthetic that clicked when I walked, and a brother who saw my service as nothing more than a convenient excuse for his failures. According to YouTube analytics, 99.5% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The case before Judge Harrison was supposed to be simple: a property dispute over our late father's hardware store. Dad had built Sullivan & Sons from nothing, working 16-hour days until his calloused hands could barely grip a wrench. When he passed 2 years ago, he left the business to both Tommy and me, 50-50. The problem was, while I was overseas getting my leg blown off for my country, Tommy was at home getting high and running the business into the ground. I'd returned to find $200,000 in debt, unpaid suppliers threatening lawsuits, and a brother who blamed everyone but himself for the mess he'd created. When I suggested we sell the property to pay off the debts and split what remained, Tommy hired a lawyer and claimed I'd abandoned my responsibilities to the business, and to him. Your Honor, Tommy's attorney, a slick-haired man named Peterson, was saying, my client has been the sole operator of this business for over 4 years, while his brother was off playing soldier. Marcus Sullivan left his family obligations behind to pursue what can only be described as an extended vacation funded by taxpayers. The words hit me like shrapnel. My jaw clenched so tight, I thought my teeth might crack. Tommy sat beside his lawyer, nodding along like a bobblehead, his bloodshot eyes avoiding mine. He'd gained at least 50 pounds since I'd been gone, his once athletic frame now soft and bloated from beer and self-pity. My own attorney, Sarah Chen, shot to her feet. Objection, Your Honor. Staff Sergeant Sullivan's military service is not on trial here. Judge Harrison, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, raised a hand. Sustained. Mr. Peterson, stick to the relevant facts. But Peterson wasn't done. He gestured toward me with theatrical flair. The relevant fact, Your Honor, is that Thomas Sullivan has dedicated his life to preserving his family's legacy, while his brother chose to abandon that responsibility. Military service, while commendable, doesn't excuse neglecting one's duty to family. I felt my face burning. Around the courtroom, I caught glimpses of people nodding, as if Peterson's words made sense. As if my 3 deployments, the friends I'd lost, the nights I'd lain awake in a hospital bed, wondering if I'd ever walk again, were somehow less important than inventory management and customer service. Then Tommy took the stand. Tell us about your relationship with your brother, Peterson prompted. Tommy leaned into the microphone, his voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. Marcus was always the favorite. Dad was so proud when he enlisted, always talking about his war hero son. But while he was off collecting his medals and glory, I was here every day, keeping Dad's dream alive. The lies came so easily from his lips. Dad had never played favorites. If anything, he'd worried constantly about me overseas, calling every few days to check on business, while asking Sarah Chen to keep him updated on my unit's movements through news reports. And when you needed help with the business, Peterson continued, I wrote to him dozens of times. Emails, letters through the Red Cross, even had Dad write to his commanding officer. But Marcus was too busy being a hero to care about his family's struggles. Tommy's voice cracked with manufactured emotion. I had to watch our father work himself to death, trying to keep the business afloat without his partner. I gripped the arms of my chair. Sarah Chen had copies of every communication between Tommy and me. The reality was that Tommy had written exactly 3 emails in 4 years, each one asking for money rather than help. He'd never mentioned the business being in trouble, never asked for advice, never indicated he wanted my input on anything. But the worst was yet to come. "Your Honor," Peterson said, pulling out a folder, "I'd like to submit into evidence these photographs from social media showing the defendant enjoying himself at various recreational activities while his brother struggled alone." The photos flashed on the courtroom screen. Me at a USO event in Germany during a brief R&R, smiling with other soldiers. A picture from a base barbecue in Afghanistan. Another of me receiving my Bronze Star, my face stoic and professional as the medal was pinned to my chest. "As you can see," Peterson continued, "Staff Sergeant Sullivan seemed to find plenty of time for parties and photo opportunities, but couldn't spare a moment for family obligations." Tommy leaned forward, his voice rising with indignation. "Look at him up there, getting another medal, another pat on the head. You know what I was doing that day?" I was at Dad's bedside in the ICU, holding his hand while he worried about the business, about Marcus, about everything falling apart. But sure, let's give the war hero another ribbon to wear. The courtroom was silent except for the air conditioning's mechanical wheeze. I felt every eye on me, judging, measuring my service against Tommy's sacrifice. My throat felt dry as dust, my hands trembling with suppressed rage. "Mr. Sullivan," Peterson addressed Tommy directly, "in your opinion, does your brother's military service excuse his abandonment of family responsibilities?" Sarah Chen objected, but Tommy was already answering. "Military service is honorable, but it doesn't make you better than everyone else. It doesn't excuse leaving your family to struggle alone. Marcus chose his path, and I respect that, but he can't come home and expect to profit from the work I did while he was off playing G.I. Joe. Playing G.I. Joe." The words echoed in the courtroom like a gunshot. I felt my vision tunnel, my breathing become shallow. Playing G.I. Joe. As if the scar tissue covering 30% of my body was from a game. As if the nightmares that still woke me in cold sweats were just bedtime stories. As if Rodriguez, Martinez, and Jackson, good soldiers who didn't make it home, had died playing make-believe. Judge Harrison called for a brief recess, and I limped to the bathroom on shaking legs. In the mirror, I saw a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, broken. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I'd come home expecting gratitude, respect, a chance to rebuild. Instead, I found betrayal from the one person who should have had my back. When court resumed, Sarah Chen called me to testify. I took the stand with as much dignity as I could muster, my prosthetic clicking audibly in the silence. Every step felt like a mile, every breath like drowning. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan," Sarah began gently, "can you tell the court about your communication with your brother during your deployments?" I spoke about the emails Tommy had ignored, the calls that went unreturned, the letters I'd sent asking about the business that were never answered. I described my father's final conversation with me 3 months before his death, when he'd assured me that Tommy was handling things fine and that I shouldn't worry about home while I was serving overseas. "Did you ever refuse to help with family obligations?" Sarah asked. "No, ma'am." I sent money home whenever Tommy asked. I even had my combat pay automatically deposited into the business account during my second deployment. But Tommy never told me there were problems that needed my attention. And if you had known, I would have taken emergency leave, The Army has provisions for family emergencies. I could have been home in 72 hours. When Peterson cross-examined me, he was relentless. Isn't it true, Sergeant Sullivan, that you chose military service over family obligation? I chose to serve my country, sir. That doesn't mean I abandoned my family. But you were gone for 4 years. 4 years while your brother carried the entire burden of your family's business. I was deployed, sir, not on vacation. Peterson smiled coldly. Come now, Sergeant. Surely you must admit there were recreational activities, downtime, opportunities for personal enjoyment even during your deployments? I thought of the few moments of levity we'd managed to steal between patrols, the gallows humor that kept us sane, the brief respites that made the horror bearable. Yes, sir, there were moments of downtime, moments you chose to spend on personal recreation rather than family communication. The trap was closing around me. Any answer I gave would sound like an excuse. Sir, I wrote to my family regularly. I called when communications allowed. I sent money when it was requested. But you didn't come home when your family needed you. I wasn't told my family needed me, because you made it clear your military career came first. I felt the fight drain out of me. This wasn't about evidence or truth. It was about narrative, and Peterson had crafted a story where I was the selfish soldier who chose glory over responsibility. Tommy was nodding along in the gallery, his face a mask of wounded righteousness. But then something happened that changed everything. Your Honor, came a voice from the back of the courtroom. I apologize for the interruption, but I believe this court needs to hear some additional testimony. Everyone turned to see a woman in army dress blues walking down the aisle. She was about my age, with the bearing of a seasoned NCO and the ribbons of someone who'd seen combat. Behind her walked 2 men, also in uniform, their faces grim and purposeful. Judge Harrison looked confused but intrigued. And you are? Sergeant First Class Jennifer Kowalski, Your Honor. I served with Staff Sergeant Sullivan in Afghanistan. She gestured to the men behind her. These are Specialist Rodriguez, brother of fallen soldier Private First Class Eduardo Rodriguez, and Sergeant Mason, who also served in Sergeant Sullivan's unit. Peterson shot to his feet. Objection! These witnesses weren't disclosed. Your Honor, Kowalski interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. We drove 18 hours straight from Fort Campbell when we heard about these proceedings. We couldn't stand by and let this soldier's service be dishonored based on lies and half-truths. Judge Harrison studied the uniformed soldiers for a long moment. This is highly irregular. Your Honor, Sarah Chen interjected quickly, given the extensive testimony about my client's military service, I believe the court would benefit from hearing from those who actually served with him. Mr. Peterson? The judge asked. Peterson looked like he'd swallowed a wasp. This is clearly a publicity stunt designed to manipulate the jury's emotions. There is no jury, Counselor, Judge Harrison reminded him. And I find myself curious about these soldiers' testimony. I'll allow it, but I'll control the scope. Sergeant Kowalski, approach the bench. What followed was a 10-minute sidebar conference that I couldn't hear but could read in body language. Peterson gesticulated wildly, clearly objecting to whatever Kowalski was telling the judge. Sarah Chen looked increasingly hopeful. Judge Harrison's expression grew stormier by the minute. Finally, the judge returned to her seat. I'm going to allow limited testimony about Staff Sergeant Sullivan's service record and communication patterns during deployment. Sergeant Kowalski, please take the stand. Kowalski moved with military precision, her oath crisp and clear. Under Sarah Chen's questioning, she painted a picture of my service that contrasted sharply with Peterson's portrayal. Staff Sergeant Sullivan was one of the most dedicated soldiers I've ever served with, Kowalski testified. He led over 40 combat patrols, saved countless lives, and earned his Bronze Star by single-handedly holding off an enemy assault while evacuating wounded civilians. Did he ever mention his family? Constantly. He worried about his father's health, talked about his brother running the family business. He sent money home every month and tried to video call his family whenever satellite communications allowed. Was there ever a time when family obligations interfered with his military duties? Never. But I can tell you that in March 2019, he requested emergency leave when he thought his father was having health problems. The leave was denied because it was based on a miscommunication, but he was prepared to come home immediately. Peterson's cross-examination was brutal, but Kowalski held firm. When he suggested that soldiers exaggerated each other's heroics, she stared him down with ice-cold eyes. Counselor, I was there when an IED tore apart Staff Sergeant Sullivan's leg. I was there when he refused morphine because he was worried about his men. I carried him to the evacuation helicopter while he was still trying to give orders to secure the area. Don't you dare tell me about exaggeration. Then Specialist Rodriguez took the stand. His testimony was devastating to Tommy's narrative. Staff Sergeant Sullivan saved my brother's life twice, Rodriguez said, his voice thick with emotion. Eddie used to read me parts of the Sarge's letters home in his own letters to our family. The Sarge was always worried about his dad, always asking his brother to take care of himself, always promising to help more when he got home. Eddie said the Sarge cried when he got word that his dad was sick, but his brother had told him everything was fine and not to worry. Did Staff Sergeant Sullivan ever speak about abandoning his family responsibilities? Sarah Chen asked. Ma'am, he carried a picture of his father and brother in his helmet. Before every patrol, he'd look at that picture and say he was fighting to protect families like his own. He talked about coming home and working with his brother to make their father proud. It was never about glory for him. It was about service and family. Peterson tried to discredit Rodriguez, suggesting his testimony was motivated by misguided loyalty, but the young soldier's sincerity was unshakable. Finally, Sergeant Mason testified about my communication attempts. The Sarge tried to call home every few days when the satellite phones were working. Mason said, most of the time, nobody answered. He'd leave messages, send emails, even tried to send letters through the Red Cross when regular mail was delayed. I remember him being frustrated because his brother never responded to his messages asking about the business. Did he ever express feeling that his military service was more important than family? No, ma'am. If anything, it was the opposite. He felt guilty about being away, worried constantly about his father, and talked about his brother like he was some kind of hero for keeping things together at home. The courtroom was silent when Mason finished. I looked over at Tommy, expecting to see shame, regret, maybe even a flicker of the brother I'd grown up with. Instead, I saw only defiance and resentment, as if he'd been personally attacked by the truth. But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. Mr. Peterson, she said, her voice carrying a new edge, I'd like to see those social media photographs again. The images flashed back on the screen. Me at the USO event, at the barbecue, receiving my medal. Sergeant Kowalski, can you identify the context of these photographs? Kowalski studied the screen. The first one is from a USO morale event in Germany. Staff Sergeant Sullivan was there for medical treatment. You can see the wheelchair in the background. The second is from a memorial barbecue for fallen soldiers at Forward Operating Base Schenck. The third is from his medal ceremony at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Judge Harrison's expression grew thunderous. So these party photos were actually from a medical evacuation, a memorial service, and a medal ceremony. Yes, Your Honor, I was present for all 3 events. The judge turned to Peterson with barely concealed disgust. Counselor, I want to see you in my chambers immediately. This court is in recess. What happened in chambers over the next 30 minutes, I can only imagine. When court resumed, Peterson looked like he'd been through a blender. Tommy was pale and sweating, clearly having been briefed on whatever judicial storm had just broken over his attorney's head. Judge Harrison took her seat with the measured deliberation of someone barely controlling their temper. After reviewing the evidence and testimony presented today, she began, I find myself compelled to address several disturbing aspects of this case. First, the deliberate mischaracterization of Staff Sergeant Sullivan's medical treatment, memorial attendance, and medal ceremony as recreational activities borders on fraudulent presentation of evidence. Peterson started to object, but Judge Harrison cut him off with a look that could have melted steel. Second, the complete failure to disclose the plaintiff's own financial mismanagement, including evidence of gambling debts, unpaid taxes, and fraudulent loan applications that I've just been made aware of through additional documentation provided by the defendant's counsel. I looked at Sarah Chen in surprise. Sa winked at me almost imperceptibly. But most importantly, Judge Harrison continued, this court will not tolerate the deliberate dishonoring of military service through false testimony and manufactured evidence. The suggestion that Staff Sergeant Sullivan's combat deployments, medical treatment, and valor recognition constitute an extended vacation is not only factually incorrect, but morally reprehensible. The judge stood, and her voice rose with unmistakable authority. Thomas Sullivan approached the bench. Tommy shuffled forward like a man walking to his execution. His lawyer tried to accompany him, but Judge Harrison waved Peterson away. Mr. Sullivan, do you understand that your brother lost his leg defending this country? Yes, Your Honor, but do you understand that he spent 14 months in medical rehabilitation learning to walk again? Your Honor, I never said. Do you understand that while you were running your family business into the ground through gambling and mismanagement, your brother was carrying wounded soldiers out of harm's way? Tommy's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No words came out. Judge Harrison's voice dropped to a deadly whisper that somehow carried throughout the silent courtroom. Mr. Sullivan, your brother's service record shows 43 combat patrols, 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with Valor, and a medical retirement due to combat injuries. Your record shows 3 DUI citations, $12,000 in gambling debts, fraudulent loan applications, and tax evasion. Yet you have the audacity to stand in my courtroom and mock his service. I wasn't mocking. Silence. Judge Harrison's shout echoed off the walls. You referred to his military service as playing G.I. Joe. You characterized his medical treatment as recreational activities. You suggested that his Valor Awards were merely pats on the head. In my courtroom, sir, that constitutes mocking, dishonoring, and disrespecting not just your brother, but every man and woman who has ever worn this nation's uniform. Tommy was visibly shaking now. Around the courtroom, spectators sat in stunned silence. Furthermore, the judge continued, the evidence clearly shows that you deliberately concealed the business's financial troubles from your brother, while simultaneously claiming he abandoned his responsibilities. You ignored his attempts to communicate, dismissed his offers of help, and then sued him for the very abandonment you engineered. Judge Harrison returned to her seat, but her voice remained at full authority. Thomas Sullivan, you are hereby found in contempt of court for perjury and fraudulent presentation of evidence. You will spend the next 30 days in county jail to contemplate your actions. Tommy's knees buckled. Peterson rushed forward, but the judge wasn't finished. Regarding the business dispute, Thomas Sullivan, you are hereby ordered to surrender all control and ownership of Sullivan and Sons Hardware to yours ye, brother Marcus Sullivan, effective immediately. All debts incurred through your mismanagement are your sole responsibility. You are further ordered to pay damages in the amount of $50,000 for legal fees and emotional distress caused by your fraudulent lawsuit. The gavel came down like a gunshot, but Judge Harrison still wasn't done. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, please stand. I rose unsteadily, my prosthetic clicking in the silence. Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that this court recognizes your service and sacrifice. What happened here today is not a reflection of how this nation views its veterans. You served with honor, you sacrificed for your country, and you deserve better than this betrayal from your own family. She looked directly at me, her expression softening slightly. I also want you to know that I'm recommending you for recognition by the Veterans Administration for the exemplary character you've shown throughout these proceedings. Despite being attacked, dishonored, and betrayed, you maintained your dignity and composure in a way that reflects the highest ideals of military service. Tears, I didn't even realize I was shedding, dripped onto my dress blue jacket. Finally, Judge Harrison said, turning back to the courtroom, let this be a lesson to everyone present. Our service members sacrifice more than we can imagine to defend our freedoms. They deserve our respect, our support, and our gratitude, not our mockery. Anyone who dishonors their service dishonors this entire nation. The gavel came down one final time, and it was over. In the aftermath, Tommy was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence. Peterson gathered his papers with the defeated air of a man whose reputation had just been destroyed. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving me standing with Sarah Chen and my 3 unexpected witnesses. How did you know to come? I asked Kowalski. She smiled for the first time that day. Rodriguez called us after seeing a news article about the trial online. We couldn't let this stand, Marcus. You saved our lives over there. The least we could do was return the favor. Specialist Rodriguez shook my hand. My brother would have wanted us to be here. Eddie always said you'd have our backs no matter what. As we walked out of the courthouse together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Not the hollow pride that comes from medals and ceremonies, but the deep, abiding pride that comes from knowing you've been tested and found worthy, not just as a soldier, but as a person. 6 months later, I reopened Sullivan and Sons Hardware. The business was smaller than before, but honest work slowly brought it back to profitability. Tommy served his 30 days and moved to another state. We haven't spoken since the trial, and I don't expect we ever will again. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. The hardware store now displays a memorial wall honoring local veterans with photos and stories of their service. At the center hangs a picture of Dad in his Korean War uniform, surrounded by images of area soldiers who didn't make it home. It's become a gathering place for veterans, a reminder that service matters and sacrifice shouldn't be forgotten. Sometimes I still wake up with nightmares about IEDs and falling brothers. Sometimes the phantom pain in my missing leg brings tears to my eyes. But I also sleep knowing that when the chips were down, when my honor was on the line, my brothers and sisters in arms stood with me. Tommy's betrayal hurt, but their loyalty healed something I didn't even know was broken. Judge Harrison was right about one thing. Our service members deserve respect, support, and gratitude. But more than that, we deserve the truth about our sacrifices, our struggles, and our worth as human beings who chose to serve something greater than ourselves. The sign outside Sullivan and Sons Hardware now reads, Sullivan & Sons, serving veterans and community since 1987. It's not just a business anymore, it's a promise. A promise that in at least one small corner of the world, service will be honored, sacrifice will be remembered, and no veteran will stand alone when their character is questioned. My brother mocked my service in court, thinking it would give him an advantage in our legal battle. Instead, his mockery became the catalyst for a reckoning that revealed his true character while affirming the bonds forged in combat. In trying to diminish my service, he only succeeded in highlighting its value. The judge's command didn't just change the outcome of our case, it changed everything. It reminded a courtroom full of people that freedom isn't free, that sacrifice deserves respect, and that those who dishonor our service ultimately dishonor themselves. Tommy thought he was fighting for a hardware store. In the end, he lost much more than that. He lost his integrity, his family, and his brother's respect, casualties of his own making in a battle he never should have started. As for me, I gained more than just a legal victory. I rediscovered the unbreakable bonds of military brotherhood, the power of truth over deception, and the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, justice prevails. The war in Afghanistan took my leg, but it gave me something Tommy never understood, the knowledge that I'm part of something larger than myself, something worth fighting for, something that can never be mocked or diminished by small minds and petty jealousies. I am a soldier. I served with honor. And no one, not even my own brother, can take that away from me. Hooah!